Cloud. Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Laing O'Rourke, Leadership of the Top Driver Safety for All. So for those who are members of the Australian Institute for Health and Safety or the Chartered Institute for Transport Logistics, you're going to receive 5 CPD points for attending today's webinar. And there you go, that's me. Just in case you know what I look like with regards to the cameras. I'm the Program Director for the NRS Japan and its many activities. To find out more about it, please check out our website, register for our newsletter, or follow us on social media and LinkedIn, and you can be kept abreast of great presentations like this coming up. So our session is going to go for approximately 60 minutes. There's going to be plenty of time for discussion throughout. Daniel's got a big story to tell, so it may run a little bit over if there's lots of discussion, just forewarning that. It will be recorded, and we're going to be sharing on the NRC website, and we'll be taking questions throughout. So we'll share that and the PowerPoint afterwards. And we do love an interactive webinar. So please shoot some questions in here down the bottom, and we'll filter them through as we go along. And there's a chat box as well if you want to go through and share on that. And I believe I've opened it up this time and worked out how to get Monash to help me out on that. So introducing our presenter today. G'day, Daniel.
Hi, how are you?
Going well, thanks, mate. So I know it's been a bit wet up there. And to give yourselves a bit of an idea for someone so young, Daniel's got some incredible leadership, management coordination behind him. He excels in managing complex logistics and planning on major infrastructure projects. And as a result, he brings huge experience to the Sydney Metro station underneath the central station. And he's also done construction of the largest underground rail terminus in the world, so the Hong Kong Express Rail Link, which is a high-speed rail link between Hong Kong and Guangzhou, China. Both of these projects require detailed phase logistics planning and practices, and so it's not basically aligned in the construction sequence. So we're going to hear a lot about this today, how he's done it without impacting on the local community and road users. So great to have you in today, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for sort of having me here and giving me, I guess, the opportunity to sort of share, I guess, some of my experiences and I guess what I've learned along the way.
Awesome. Well, let's hear all about your story, mate. There's a lot to share.
Okay. So we'll get quite straight into it because there is quite a lot of content to cover today. So first off, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of who I work for. So I work for Laing O'Rourke, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of. And that's basically one of the largest privately owned engineering sort of construction businesses out there. Laing O'Rourke has actually been operating in Australia for over sort of 50 years. And we're sort of pioneering ourselves to be sort of the recognised leaders for innovation and excellence, particularly within the construction industry and engineering industries. We work across a whole range of different sort of sectors, ranging from transport, typical buildings, so your high-rises, defence projects, airports, mining, civil and social infrastructure. So quite a broad portfolio, some quite complex, challenging projects, both from sort of a logistic background and an engineering background. Today, you'll probably hear me talk a lot about sort of Central Station, which is obviously Australia's sort of biggest station in terms of sort of size and I guess most busiest sort of station. And that project was awarded to Laing O'Rourke back in 2018. Where we won the project or the contract to build sort of the $955 million station. And that project basically, if anybody's not familiar with it, involves constructing the new underground metro platforms, constructing the Central Walk concourse, which is basically a new entrance from over at Chalmers Street, coming across sort of the light rail and into the sort of, and under the suburban platforms into the main station. And then upgrading sort of the northern concourse and building sort of a brand new roof, which is sort of the picture you can see on the top right, as well as sort of improving access throughout the station for sort of people with less visibility and things like that. So a lot of new lifts and escalators. Everyone sort of likes to get into stats and really just to give you a bit of perspective around how big this project is. So we're going to excavate over 528,000 tonnes of spoil from the project, which is the equivalent of 16,500 truck and dogs, taking just spoil or sandstone off the project. We've got 84,000 tons of concrete, so that's another 5,000 trucks on the road delivering concrete. We've got approximately 6,500 tons of reinforcement steel, so that's 650 trailers. These are your sort of 90-meter long trailers bringing in 20 to 30 ton of steel at a time. We've got 700 tons of structural steel, of which 300 tons of that is in the new roof. We've got 42 new escalators going in and 14 new lifts. So all the suburban platforms in the future will actually have lift access, which they currently do not have. In total, there's 955 meters of escalators being installed, 5,500 people employed over the duration of the project. The project's running for 4 years. We're sort of 2 and a bit years through the project now. 20,000 square meters of floor tiles just on the concourses alone, and sort of 265,000 meters of cable. So it's a decent sized project.
So you've always got about what, 22,000, at least 22, 24, 25,000 truck movements in there through the heart of Sydney.
Yes, and for anybody that sort of, I guess, knows where we're stationed, so obviously the station itself is surrounded by live rail. There is predominantly one entrance point in and out of the station from Regent Street. So quite a congested and quite a tight site to be able to do sort of the volume of work that we're talking about today. So as part of that, we're going to talk you through, I guess, how we sort of set up our site and manage safety. So obviously, one of the big things we're focused on is how we can minimize disruption to the pedestrians, cyclists, and general road users. Obviously, we're talking about a lot of big truck movements, heavy vehicle movements that have a huge impact on local road users. So we want to minimize that as much as possible. And part of that is to make sure our trucks and heavy vehicles get to the arterial road network as soon as practically possible. So we're not going through the city, we're not going past schools, we're avoiding hospitals and areas like that. Obviously, we don't want to disrupt local buses. We don't, where we can, want to modify existing conditions on the road, so we don't want to change curbs or existing traffic operations. We want to try and make sure, I guess, our operations don't impact the daily peak period, so everyone that's trying to get home from work don't want to be disrupted by our activities. So where possible, we try and make sure a lot of our deliveries occur outside of them peak times, particularly school times and things like that. Obviously, the impact of our project cannot affect businesses and properties, so we can't, disrupt our shop fronts and anybody that's working in and around the site. Obviously, we want to remain incident-free, and we definitely, number one, sort of for us, is we do not want to hurt any members of the public. So for us to be able to do this, we have to work collaboratively with various stakeholders across numbers of different agencies and industries, really to make sure that our impacts are minimized. And that's what really I'm here to talk to you about today. So kind of split this down into sort of the 6-7 main areas you see on the screen. So one of the first one is how we actually set up for success, how we drive our leadership and management agenda to make sure everybody comes with us on that journey and gets on board and follows sort of our strategy around what we're looking to do. As part of that, obviously, we have the legislation. So we've got the Heavy Vehicle National Law and Chain of Responsibility that helps us drive the direction in which we're taking and gives us, I guess, a benchmark that we need to set and meet or be above. I'm going to also talk to you around a process called DSMA, so Design, Manufacture and Assembly, particularly for the new roof and how we built that and how we took some of them high risks off the road in some of our engineering and design practices. Also going to touch on the Sydney Metro Heavy Vehicle Minimum Standard and Driver Standard. So that is an initiative that Sydney Metro have rolled out across all their projects, basically ensuring that their vehicles that come to their projects are of a minimum standard and that their drivers also are of that standard. And they complete a course, which we'll touch on in a bit more info later. Also going to talk to you around how we mobilize our heavy vehicles to this project and what we look for in terms of to make sure they're compliant and safe. Going to give you a bit of an outline of how we manage sort of the day-to-day on site from a delivery management system. And then I will touch on just some of the smarts around chain of responsibility. We've particular sort of route compliance, so making sure our trucks stick to the approved routes, how we manage mass and dimension to make sure we're not overloading roads or putting people at risk by vehicles leaving our site that are overloaded, and how we ensure all our loads are secure before they leave our site. So it all starts, I guess, back at the leadership and management sort of phase. And that really for us is getting down onto paper a plan. And the three main plans that do that for us at Central Station, they are the construction traffic management plan, which really outlines our impact to the local road and network of how we're going to minimize them sort of impacts and control them to make sure that we are putting the public first and we are minimizing disruption wherever possible. The second one is our sort of site logistic management plan, which really dives into the deep detail of how we're going to set the job up, set up correctly so that we can put things in like weigh bridges, make sure our cranes have loading bays so that we can manage drivers' fatigue, and really set the site up right so we're allowing people that visit our site to come to work with that sort of success and certainty that they know where they're going, when they're going to be unloaded, and how we're going to do it, and the controls are in place to manage them deliveries. And then the last one is sort of how we're going to comply to sort of the chain of responsibility and heavy vehicle national law legislation. So that implements and outlines sort of the controls that we have in place around mass, fatigue, dimensions. And these three documents, I say, are really our plan of how we go to work on this site. And they then are all sort of backed up by the various pieces of legislation you see sort of mentioned on the screen, and sort of our clients' requirements for things that they look like, you know, around traffic management frameworks, environmental management frameworks, health and safety standards.
And just a quick question on that. I've got a question here through from Ron. He's just said, are the national heavy vehicle driver fatigue also relevant to you in this sort of project? So we're just sort of touching on those sort of elements in there.
So absolutely, and I do touch on fatigue in a little bit more detail later, but I guess if you've got a delivery driver that's coming to your site, and for whatever reason you delay him on your site because you're not ready to receive that delivery, and then in turn knocks him back for another job, obviously under the fatigue legislation, he can only work 10 hours a day or 12 hours depending on what his fatigue class is, and he's got to have adequate rest breaks. Now, depending on what type of vehicle it is, will dictate as and where he can stop and have his rest breaks. So absolutely, we as sort of the main contractor that are receiving these sorts of deliveries absolutely have a duty to play.
And I guess another interesting point, this is we're going into this, when you think of it as a leadership, you've designed all this for your transport logistics and moving around with a CVD. And then on top of that, I guess we look at the weather events taking place at the moment. You've had to build this through COVID. And then you also had some drought periods at the start of it as well. So I guess there's been a lot of external factors which added additional pressure to you in coming out of left to right to you guys as well.
Absolutely. I mean, COVID in a sense has been quite kind to us on the basis that obviously the station is less busier, the roads are less busier, which has allowed us to speed up certain parts of the program and close sort of larger areas of the northern concourse or the public areas, which has allowed us to expedite work and do work that otherwise would have been done in a lot more sort of piecemeal fashion, a lot quicker and safer. So in that respect, COVID was good. Obviously, it had its own challenges around how you get a workforce of sort of 500 people to socially distance and go through that and get everybody coming to site safely and tracking sort of movements of different teams. But then you look at sort of the weather, obviously the bushfires didn't really play too much of an impact to us at Central, but some of the weather has obviously delayed sort of shipping ports, tip sites are closed, things like that, that also put additional sort of constraints on the project, where we've had to effectively cancel deliveries and review what our plan for the day is based on that. And I guess that's the key thing is it's good to have these plans, but these plans need to be flexible in that you can adapt and tailor your approach on the day to whatever's unfolding.
Great.
So as part of sort of the leadership and management, Laing O'Rourke have actually put together a number of what we call primary standards. And these are really designed to eliminate and remove our key risks. And when we say key risks, these are things that are likely to result in serious injury, fatality or significant sort of property damage. So these are sort of our Bible, if you like, of how we go to work. And you can see there's several on there. And they really are sort of a best practice guide, an in-house resource that we use, that when we're putting together our plans, we make sure that we cover these items off. So it covers things like fitness for work, which touches on, sort of fatigue, abuse of substances such as alcohol or drugs.
Site we're going to be in, because there are certain parts where a mask is mandatory.
So I didn't catch that, sorry.
That wasn't me. I'm not sure where that one came from.
I would recommend speaking to safety, because I'm not across the detail of which bit of the site needs which.
Well, this is very unique, as only really the three of us should have ability to talk.
No.
Hello?
Yeah, not a problem. I'll send you a message now.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
That's okay. So were you referring to, I guess, these three different management plans around which piece referred to which part of the site? Is that the question?
I'm not sure, Daniel. Someone just crossed in there all of a sudden. I'm not sure where they came from. It's interesting. I'll let you just keep moving along.
Okay. So our primary standards, I guess, provide that sort of guideline of how we, I guess, set up the site in terms of best practice and move forward. And so it covers things like fitness to work, which is, things like fatigue, drug and alcohol abuse. Traffic management really details how we control sort of our risks in and around sort of the public and road infrastructure. Site establishment and logistics is around how we set up our site to ensure that it is safe, and really allows us to go to work with that certainty, so we allow and make sure we've got the appropriate staging and lay down areas for deliveries. There's places where truck drivers can park up and go and have a break, weigh bridges and things like that. And then our primary standard around planting equipment is how we mobilize sort of vehicles and ensure that they meet our minimum standard for things like, additional mirrors, telematic systems and things like that. We then have what's known as our fatal and severe risks, which stands for FSRs. And these are our high consequence risks. And effectively what these do is they give us a go or no go. So whenever we're setting up a new area of the site or doing a new activity, we run through these sort of checklists to make sure we've got our minimum controls in place. And if we don't have them controls in place, we stop until they're implemented, and then we go again. So for things like plants and equipment, we go through, make sure our operators have received the required training and are competent to operate the right machine or the license for that type of vehicle. It's been pre-mobilized, it meets our minimum standards, seat belts, fire extinguishers, etc. Similarly, with our sort of impact on the road, so we make sure that if we're needing to communicate with the public, that we've got our TCPs in place, they've been approved, the signage is installed as correct, and things like that before we go to work. So now I'm going to talk to you about sort of Central's new roof. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen sort of Central Station's roof. I guess the key opening statements for this is Central's roof was built 3 times. That probably not a lot of people know that. So the first time we actually built this roof was digitally on a computer using modeling software, which is what sort of the first image and the bottom left image represents. That allowed us, I guess, to plan how we were going to build it, how we were going to stage the actual build, and work out sort of what the dimensions and component sizes were that we needed to bring in to be able to build this roof. The other thing that's quite interesting about the roof is it was built on 7 weekends. So there were 7 weekends where we would have took possession of the sort of the Northern Concourse, where we would have shut down the adjacent lines of Northern Concourse from members of the public from a Friday evening at sort of midnight through to a Monday morning at 5 a.m. and actually built this roof over 7 weekends. So you can see sort of the whole structure there in some of the pictures. And that roof consists of sort of 330 tons of steel, 58 cassettes, and I'll touch on them in a minute, what they mean and look like, that are quite large. So obviously we wanted to be certain that we could actually build this, deliver it safely, and then put it up on a weekend. So first stage, I say, was to design it all on the computer, make sure it all worked and we could physically get the component sizes to work, fit on trucks. The second thing we did then was actually build the roof 4 meters in the air at the fabrication yard, which is sort of what the middle picture sort of represents there. So that's up in Curry in sort of the steel fabricator's yard, and we actually assembled the full roof up there. We then stripped that roof down into probably about 80 deliveries in total, sort of flat packed it, and then sent it to Central on a course of 7 weekends, basically, where we installed it. Now, the bottom sort of left picture here actually represents the canopies or cassettes that actually drop into the roof once the steel frame structure has been built. And there's actually 58 of them in total. And some of the biggest were sort of 5 meters wide and 14 meters in length. So you're talking sort of a 19-meter truck as a minimum with a 5-meter wide load. So that's twice the width of your normal sort of car, coming down all the way from Curry, across the Harbour Bridge and down into Central Station over 7 weekends to build this. So of course we did some trials, which is what you can see in sort of the bottom picture was the first trial where we made sure we could actually get it into the site and it wasn't going to get snagged near the bridge. And then we actually brought this in and then built it over 7 weekends. And just that planning and that level of detail allowed us to go to work with that certainty. So we knew the routes we were going to take. We were able to model them and check them for sort of swept path and collisions with trees and other sort of road infrastructure. And I say we were able to do it over 7 weekends.
Did any unexpected issues pop up at all with regards to, so with all that planning, did anything go, or did it all work perfectly?
So from a logistics sort of staging point of view, it all went sort of perfectly. Obviously, there's obviously the challenges around how you build sort of the structural steel, particularly around sort of temperatures when you hit sort of midday and the temperature's starting to get warm and some of the steel components are expanding. But yeah, in terms of actual logistic and the staging point of view, it all went ahead.
That's awesome news.
Oh, my presentation's bouncing around a bit, sorry. I don't know what's happened there.
Oh, that's right. I think we had a question slide just in the middle and we keep on moving along, mate.
Okay, so there's no questions on that, okay. So next thing I'm going to talk to you around is the Sydney Metro Heavy Vehicle Standard. So what this is actually a client initiative really to sort of, I guess, leave a bit of a legacy behind. So what Sydney Metro have effectively committed to doing is, and we have at Laing O'Rourke, is to ensure that any vehicle that's over 4.5 tonne in weight, making more than 5 visits to any of our sort of sites or projects over any 12-month period would actually meet Sydney Metro's spec. And what this basically means is we will put additional things onto that vehicle to ensure that it is safe and minimises risk to other road users. So things like side underrun protection, which you can sort of see in the pictures on the right, sort of prevent anybody being stuck under the vehicles of the vehicle and being run over. So things like cyclists that are on the road, this side underrun protection protects them from that. Vehicle telematics systems that allow us to monitor sort of routes where the drivers are going, fatigue, speed compliance, and things like that. So we have full line of sight as to routes that they've taken to ensure they're on compliant roads. You know, we're not using sort of rat runs through local council areas and things like that. And then, yeah, we're using the correct road for the type of vehicle. We've got things like the class 4, 5, and 6 mirrors, which are effectively wide angle mirrors, blind spot mirrors, and the front blind spot that allow sort of the driver behind the vehicle to actually enhance his visibility. So he can see directly what's in front of him and what's around all sides of his vehicle. So he's aware if anybody gets too close, he can actually see them, which typically on a truck, you can't. Other initiatives, sort of blind spot elimination detection systems. A lot of the vehicles now have cameras at the front or panes or left out of the door panels. So they actually, truck driver can look down and look across and actually see at the side of him what's beside him. Then there's sort of the enhanced visibility, so some of the stickers and the graphics you see on the truck. A lot of other road users to some of the dangers around these vehicles that are on the road, you know, such as don't overtake if a truck's coming. Be aware of sort of blind spots if you get too close. And then we encourage sort of the vehicles to get accredited and work towards that truck safe scheme.
So it was an interesting point you just said then, Daniel. So some of those trucks, are they going sort of, some of them, the trucking companies saying, are they going sort of above and beyond the standards as well? Because you meant some of the sensors and cameras, which weren't sort of listed in the standards. Are you seeing something?
Absolutely. So we've got guys that just kind of took the approach that, you know, mirrors don't give you everything, whereas cameras, you know, you're able to change the angle on the camera, you're able to see a lot more. Some of the cameras have detection systems in them now that actually alert the driver to a presence of something. So the driver gets straight away a notification that something's there, rather than having to rely and look at his mirrors.
And I noticed you had a Grasshopper Environmental truck in the picture there. So we're actually doing a webinar with them on the 15th of July. So you can actually hear from a trucking company how they've gone through and put all the technology and standards in place, and hear from them as to why they and how they found it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Grasshopper are pretty good in that respect. So as part of that, there is then the Sydney Metro Heavy Vehicle Driver Standard. And what this really is a one-day TAFE course around sort of heavy vehicle driver awareness. So what it really does is focuses on how we want drivers to behave on the road. So we sort of set the expectations of what we expect with them when they're on the road. You know, it's all about, I guess, being professional in what they do. You know, this is their job, this is their career. So they need to be aware of how their behavior and their actions that they take on the road impact other road users. And there's all sorts of things we do through that. You know, we talk to them around blind spots and how we can help them deal with that, approved haulage routes. And this course is actually an accredited course that the drivers get sort of accredited for. And on Central, I'm safe to say as of sort of October last year, we'd put over 1,700 drivers on this course.
Wow.
And we've had some sort of pretty fantastic, like 90% of drivers that go on that course come back and say, you know, that was really worthwhile. We actually got something from that I didn't think about. So it's not like we're teaching truck drivers to suck eggs. We're actually really, I guess, helping them go to work with that certainty as well, that they've done everything in their power, make sure that their vehicle is safe and that they're minimising their impact on the road.
And I guess in that there's things that they don't know that they don't know. So I guess is that artwork, that art form of how do you actually get them to recognise these sort of simple things that they probably see every day, but never really considered in that different sort of lens.
Exactly that. 100%. It's getting them to be open to that engagement, to listen to that feedback. Because, I mean, let's face it, if you have somebody telling them, oh, you've got to go on a course and spend one day learning all about sort of vehicle safety and how your impact or how your vehicle and what you impact the road, they'll laugh at you and say, I've been doing this for 30 years. What are you going to teach me? You know, but to break it back down and get that engagement, and it's great to see sort of the feedback that we've got from that has been incredible.
Is that TAFE course publicly available at all, Daniel, or is it just for the?
It's done through TAFE. So yes, I believe people can enroll themselves and get themselves on that.
Cool. Thanks for the question, Klaus.
Okay. So the next one then is, I guess, how we sort of enforce this driver standard on our project. So what we do at Central is we communicate that requirement to all our subcontractors, all our supply chain. So we make it very clear, I guess, when they're tendering the work. So in all our scope of works documents, it's all these sorts of requirements are listed out. So they're fully aware that when they come into Central, if they're successful and win the project, these are the expectations. These are the things you need to comply with. We then sort of have a kickoff meeting with them once they've been awarded the package, where we actually go through, reinforce the standard, and remind them at that sort of time that these are the standards you need to comply with, and that's how you get access to our site.
Wow.
What that looks like in, I guess, a bit more detail is they basically submit their pre-mobilization document to us. We have a dedicated plant assessor that will then review that inspection sheet. If he's happy with what's been submitted, he will arrange to go out and inspect that vehicle at their site. If he's happy with it, he will approve them to access site. From there, they get issued what's called a field view ID. which is a unique ID number for that particular vehicle that allows them or gives them access to our delivery management system, voyage control, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail. If it's not compliant, there's something missing, we advise them they need to rectify that, and then the process repeats until they get compliant. So they can't actually get access to our site without completing these steps, because they can't make a booking, and so they can't turn up effectively. They get sent away if they turned up.
Wow.
Which brings us on to, I guess, our next point, which is our delivery management system. So our delivery management system is known as voyage control. And what that really is an interactive time app-based tracking and scheduling platform that allows us to schedule and manage every single delivery that comes to our site. So what that means in reality is every single vehicle that drives to our site, I know who it is, what time it's arriving, where it's going, what route it's took, what it's bringing, how it's going to be unloaded. And what that allows me to do is put together a plan for the day. So every day my team will sit down and we'll put together a delivery schedule for the day that we can then roll out across the site to, you know, the gate people, traffic control in the yard, to the crane team, to the fork operators. That effectively gives them a run sheet for the day. So they know exactly what's coming, what time it's coming, what type of vehicle it is, and where it's going. That allows us then to schedule and make sure that we've got a nice, consistent, smooth flow of deliveries, rather than everything arriving at once and bottlenecking the site, creating congestion all through the site and creating additional risks, or having trucks queuing out the site on the road that then impact the public. What we found with this, though, is by scheduling and having this process, we have a quicker turnaround on site, because vehicles come straight in, they go to a designated point, they're unloaded, and they leave, which everybody loves. Truck drivers love to get in, get out. We're able to track the routes in which they take to get here, so we know that they're compliant and they haven't deviated or took a local rat run down a council street. We're able to generate all sorts of reports and data around productivity, how efficient certain deliveries are, or subcontractors, and where we might have potential problems that we need to look out to drive that whole efficiency and drive our productivity. And I guess the prerequisites for this is, so before they can even get access to make a booking to our site, their vehicle needs to be pre-mobilized. That's that whole field view inspection to ensure that the vehicle meets Laing O'Rourke's primary standards and also Sydney Metro's heavy vehicle standards. That gets them the field view number. We then ask to see their driver's documentation. So the driver will complete that one-day cave course. We ask to see their licenses to make sure they've got the correct license for the type of vehicle they're driving. We give them the driver induction. So they're fully inducted and indoctrinated into our system, so we know how they're going to go to work. A little bit around sort of the tracking. So normally the admins generally make the bookings for the drivers in the office. Driver gets a booking number, he logs onto an app on his phone, can enter his booking number, he clicks start journey. He will then follow his approved route to get to site. Arrives at sort of the security shed, he shows the traffic controllers the booking. The traffic controllers actually log that delivery in and record that it's arrived. Straight away, a notification comes out to whoever the delivery is for, so they know that that delivery has arrived. Traffic control on site then directs it to wherever it's going to its designated loading bay, gets unloaded, leaves site. Again, it also then gets recorded that it's left site, so we know exactly how long that vehicle has been on site. So if there are delays where we've not unloaded him because we've had issues with weather or anything like that, we've got full line of sight, so we can make the call that we need to send this driver away. We're not going to unload this truck today, or there's an issue like that. We can manage that. So we're proactively managing sort of driver's fatigue. A few pictures here. So this gives you an example of sort of an approved booking form. QR code, so traffic control just photograph the QR code, bang, straight away populates the form, logged in. Tells you sort of time they're coming, who it's for, what it is it's bringing in, where it's going, sort of all the information we need there, or anybody out in the field needs to be able to direct that delivery to where it's going. Example of sort of the daily run sheet, so it tells us what's coming in, where it's going, what it's doing.
Wow.
Bit of an example of some of the tracking. So we can see vehicles that are inbound to our site. So we know at any given time where all our vehicles are that are on their way to our site. We know when a driver is late. So the picture on the right shows, a driver's supposed to arrive at 4:30 in the morning. He's currently tracking an hour and 38 minutes late. So we're aware of that, and we can make the necessary adjustments in the day to be able to accommodate him, or reach out to the driver to say, look, sorry, we can't take you today for whatever reason.
So on that, like if they're running late, because the advantage is like, what I love is your site's right in the middle of the city. So even if they're running late, they won't get stuck in the bottleneck and have to keep driving around the city. They can just come straight on in, yeah?
Correct, yes. That's exactly the point, because obviously where we are located, we are in the heart of the city. So the last thing you want is trucks circling around the city. All good?
All good.
As part of that sort of process, when our delivery drivers start their journey, we actually built in a load of what we call flexible forms that allow us to ask drivers specific questions. And there's some examples of them there. So, have you got or had adequate rest? Is your blood alcohol level 0.0? Have you worked less than 12 hours in the last 24 hours? Can you confirm you're not under the influence of any banned substances and things like that? So straight away, we're getting the drivers to declare that they are fit for work and that they understand our standards, and that's what we're enforcing. This one touches on sort of, I guess, the way we sort of establish and set up our sites with regards to sort of mass management. So obviously with the huge number of heavy vehicles, particularly truck and dogs that we've got leaving our site, we put in a mass management system, a weighbridge effectively. Now our weighbridge is quite unique in that it allows us to weigh the individual axle on every single truck effectively. So rather than just get a gross weight that tells you, yes, you're overweight or no, you're underweight, we can actually weigh every single axle of that vehicle. So we know if a particular axle is overweight, we can deal with that on site. The way this works basically is similar to the pre-mobilization. So when the truck's enrolled, it's got given a card, an FRD card that he basically is assigned to his truck that he only gets once his vehicle's been pre-mobilized. That allows him then, when he approaches the weighbridge, to tap on. That brings up all the allowable populated fields of what that individual vehicle's individual axles can be. He taps on straight away, LED screen lights up to say green, it'll do it by axle. So you have all your, and I'll show you a photo in a minute. All your individual axles are good to go and your mass is good, or no, you've got a problem on axle number 2 where you're overloaded. If it's overloaded, red light comes up. Driver has to acknowledge that he's overloaded on the screen. Bit of an example here. So you can see straight away from sort of this one, most of them are good, and then there's an example where axle 3 has actually been overloaded, and the total as a result of that has been breached. Weighbridge obviously gets tested and certified every 6 months with a test weight, and then we do a full service and dead weight test every 12 months just to make sure it is accredited and complies.
So how did you arrive at the decision to use the weighbridge, or what was the, how did you come, like, was there other options, like, and I'm also keen to know, how do you know the exact mass is going in when they're digging it out and dropping it in the trucks as well, the spoil?
So a good question. So I don't know if many of the people are aware, but most trucks this day and age are all fitted with truck scales. The problem I have with truck scales is they have to be calibrated regularly and they don't work on uneven ground. So if you've got the slightest bit of incline or a bit of sediment or mud underneath the wheel, it throws that axle out. It gives that driver full sense of security that his vehicle is under the weight and he's good to go. So the weighbridge actually allows you to go to work with that certainty that you know every single axle what the weight is, and you know what the overall gross weight is. Now, the challenge is most truck and dogs, there's a whole different range in Australia of different truck and dogs that can take different loads, depending on its configuration and type of vehicle. So to take that decision-making from the driver and the guys that are loading them, so sort of the operator that's dealing with maybe 50 trucks a day, he's having to work, okay, you can take 10 loads, you can only take 8 loads. We put the weighbridge in, which then means we get the actual documentation when the truck gets onboarded. We key that information into the weighbridge that is unique to that truck. So we get that documentation from the manufacturer of the vehicle that says this vehicle can take this, 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 and this axle. That's what goes into the weighbridge. So there is no decision making for the driver. There's no decision making for the operator that's loading him. It's black and white. This is what you're allowed to take, and the computer does it all for you.
Nice.
Dimension management. So with this one, I guess sort of Laing O'Rourke's primary duties are to ensure that any vehicle that really leaves our site stays within its prescribed height, length, and width limits. So obviously we're a major construction project. We've got a lot of big pieces of equipment, plant and things that we're moving around, you know, excavators, road headers, you know, 60, 70 ton, the cranes and things like that were 300-400 ton each, several deliveries of big pieces of equipment that we're sending out of our site onto the public road. So we need to make sure that, you know, that they meet the prescribed height, length, and width limits. So we can't have things overhanging that are going to come into contact with members of the public or other road infrastructure. So the way we manage this is we set up a sort of performance guide that we make sure all our sort of supply chain are aware of. And that has particular hold points in place that they have to satisfy to ensure that we're sort of meeting our obligations. And that fundamentally is a load safety inspection checklist. So before any delivery leaves our site, the driver will go through and fill that load safety inspection form in. And then that is reviewed and countersigned by a member of the logistic team to confirm that that load is within its sort of prescribed limits and is safe to leave our site. Now, what we found, or what I found in the past, is truck drivers like to argue sometimes that they know better. So to help us out in the field, we've actually developed this sort of calculator with Synergy that helps us work out sort of the quantity and type of lashing and tensioning method required for different scenarios. And this tool works a treat. So it's effectively an Excel spreadsheet that you take out on a tablet, and you enter in all the information, and it comes up black and white, yes or no, you're doing enough, or no, you're not. And you can prove to the drivers then that they haven't got enough restraint based on the calculation.
Wow. Has that been a bit of an eye-opener for a few truck drivers, you think, going through this?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had truck drivers that will argue with me about taking sort of containers off and getting away with just 2 trains, you know, two tension trains rather than the usual 4, no headboard, on the basis that he's only going up to Redfern.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah. But as you say to him, it only takes a second for that container to come sliding off into a member of the public's car, and you've killed them. Then what happens?
It's like that line when people just drink drive that little bit. Oh, I'm just going down the corner, so
Exactly.
I'm right. I can just push that envelope on just a little bit over, and it's always when something goes wrong.
Exactly. And when you've got a tool like this that is black and white, that no, you don't have enough chains, no, you don't have enough lashing, your angle's wrong, they can't argue with that. It's black and white. It's there in front of them. So I guess just to summarize, I guess some of the benefits with the approach that we've taken. So all of these sorts of things and initiatives we put in place allows, I guess, accountability to be taking place. So Laing O'Rourke, sort of as a principal contractor, takes its role very seriously, and we actively try and prevent and minimize risk to the public and community. And we do this by setting a high standard of what we expect the vehicles on the road to adhere to, and also around that whole behavior piece of what we're looking to see from our drivers. We use, obviously, technology to help us with this. There's sort of some of the examples I showed you around the DFMA, the Voice Control Delivery Management System, to help us drive that sort of compliance. Visibility is also another key part of this. So we don't just take the truck driver or the trucking company's word for it. We actually send our own people out there to verify that these vehicles are compliant, that they do meet our standards. That really helps us drive compliance, but also helps us get that sort of legacy and upskilling people across the industry. So by going out and talking to the truck drivers and the owners of these vehicles, they get on board with it, and then they start to understand the standard and what we're doing and why we're doing it, which then helps to drive the compliance piece. Obviously, the behavior, the new standard, and its enforcement helps us improve the culture. So they know that we take it seriously, that we're not going to settle for second best, and that this standard is enforced on all our vehicles. We don't allow people to take shortcuts. Then there's the efficiency piece that comes from this. These things that we put in place actually allow us to be more efficient. We're reducing our delivery times. Our crane hook utilization is improving. Truck drivers actually want to come back and deliver it to us because they know they're not getting stuck in traffic, they're not getting held up on site, they can get in, they can get out. They also know that it's relatively easy for them in the sense that they know what their approved haulage routes are. They know what's expected of them. Then the sort of compliance piece, again, is going to work with certainty. So they know that they're not doing anything unsafe. They know that they meet the standard and that they're not breaching the law. And I kind of summarize now with, I guess, key five lessons really for me, which the first one is be resolute. If you set your standard, drive your standard and enforce it. So at the start of this project, we got a lot of pushback of people not wanting to follow the standard. It was too difficult, it's going to cost a bit of money. But by being resolute and steadfast, we got everybody on board and everybody's following that standard. Second one is around starting early. So I don't know if anybody's ever tried to implement an initiative or change something halfway through a project. You're up against it. You're constantly arguing and trying to change people's opinions. So the earlier in the project you start, the easier it is. Next one is sort of look for opportunities to innovate. So you don't want to stand still. You want to take this forward. You want to constantly look for better ways and easier ways to do this. Perfect example is looking at sort of the telematic systems that are out there at the moment. There's some that are quite piecemeal where you have to go through pages and pages of reports. There's some other ones out there that I'm currently looking at where the system will do it automatically for you. So you can program that system to alert you when a driver's gone over 4 hours and hasn't had his rest break, where a driver's gone 5 kilometers over the speed limit for more than 10 seconds, where a driver's deviated from a particular route. So that whole continual improvement piece also allows you to be incredibly competitive and sort of outshine your competitors. But it's also important to take that journey and that legacy and move it forward. Obviously, this doesn't go anywhere without leadership. So you need strong leadership. You need to have somebody that's going to take that and drive it until you get the desired result. And then the last piece really is around having a vision for what that future looks like. What can we do to make it better for everybody? That's really sort of the end of my presentation today. So I'm happy to, I guess, open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
We do indeed, Daniel. And I got a few for you as well. So I got one here from a couple from Ron. I'll start with the first one. He said, I understand the needs for plans to be flexible. How does the risk project timeline, how does this affect the risk project timelines?
Good question. So obviously, I guess essential, we've committed to building this station and having this station open by a set time. And as part of that, there are interim milestones. However, that doesn't mean we compromise on safety. So we have to be certain in the way we go to work. And that all starts by having that initial plan. Once you've got your plan and you know that your plan works, that's sort of your base and your framework for how you go to work each day. Obviously, things change and you need to be adaptable. But by understanding how it currently operates, then you can look for opportunities where you can change and alter that plan to manage that risk satisfactorily so that you can incorporate whatever has had to change. So with regards to sort of your major risks, they never really go away on a major project such as Central. So you're always going to have their major risks, but the controls that you put in place give you that certainty that they're being well managed and controlled.
Question here from Peter. Have you got any advice on applications on how to apply to smaller construction projects at all?
So a lot of, I guess, what I've shown you today can all be sort of tailored down to smaller projects. So So the delivery management system is a perfect example. Don't necessarily want to go into the sort of the commercials, but that is a relatively cheap system to run from a scheduling platform. And the fact that you're not having to put devices and things into people's vehicles, and we're relying on people's phones to download an app, is really quite a cost-effective solution to be able to control these risks around sort of fatigue and route awareness, and get your schedules. Things like weighbridges aren't really, each project's different, incredibly expensive, but there are other things you can do. So there are portable scales that you can drive onto. You can put truck scales or scales on excavator buckets and things like that. So there's always a way to do it for a smaller project where the budget may be smaller or the number of vehicle movements is significantly less.
Cool. Question here from Adam. Rear and front warning signage on trucks. What was this? Was it TMP or TCP, and what was it trying to achieve?
Okay, so TCP is what I refer to as a traffic control plan. And effectively that is a plan of how we're going to control traffic on the public road. So that might be things like, if we're going to take out certain lanes so that trucks can turn in with an easier swept path into our site. That's what that refers to in terms of TCP. Regarding sort of the stickers and the warning signage, that's really, I guess, for other road users to be aware of some of the risks associated with sort of heavy vehicle movements and trucks on the road. Sort of alerting other drivers to sort of blind spots that the truck might not see, and some of the hazards associated with that vehicle.
And just on that, just like a lot of people are probably aware of this from the sector, but sadly, a lot of people just don't understand the blind spots or the sweep paths or how to safely interact with trucks. So even when you get the signage, it doesn't mean for a lot of people doing it also. Great question.
Definitely.
Another question here from Klaus. And this is, I really like the idea, what this one's asking. What is the process when a truck is overloaded, e.g. on the sort of the weighbridge, and when is it detected?
Yeah,
I'll ask on that just further is, how often does it happen, sort of thing as well?
Okay, so I'll answer the question of how often it happens. So probably about 10 times per day, we would get an individual axle breach where one of the axles is overloaded. Now, that one's relatively easy to fix. So what happens with that is the truck will actually tip up so that the spoil falls back in its cab over the other axle so that it can be reallocated. If that's not possible, we've got an excavator that's stationed in the yard that will take 1 or 2 buckets out to get it within its allowable axle limit. So we typically get 10 of them a day. And bearing in mind that there's 50 to 60 loads going out each day, it's still quite high, but it's being well managed. In terms of the overall gross breach, so total mass, we might get 1 a day maximum, maybe a couple of times a week. And with that same sort of thing, so excavator will actually scrape out, or the truck will actually tip out in the yard. If it's in the dog, it'll tip out in the yard, but if it's in the actual bogey itself, then the excavator will scrape it out.
That's great. And just expand a little bit further, as drivers get more accustomed to working the site, does it get less, or does it happen more often when they're a new sort of driver on the site?
It definitely happens more often with new drivers, but then there's I guess quite a few variables that go with it. So obviously, if you've got a wet, rainy day, your moisture content is typically higher, which then affects the number of loads that go into that vehicle. So you might put the same number of bucket loads in, but you're heavier because the material is denser because it's wet. As we dig down, obviously the sandstone is more compacted, so it weighs slightly more. So there's a few things like that that you need to consider, but typically you have that core fleet of drivers that understand typically what goes into their truck, and they're generally pretty compliant.
Great question here from Michael. How did you gain the buy-in from suppliers or transport companies on ensuring their vehicles were meeting the standards?
So effectively it became a contract requirement. So they weren't able to work on our site until they satisfied that requirement. So obviously nothing sort of comes for free, so it was written into their scopes of work documents when they were tendering the projects for them to price. And then we go through that full sort of onboarding process where we inspect their vehicles to ensure that it is compliant. And if it's not, it doesn't get access to our site, it doesn't get access to the management system. So if it was to turn up and wasn't booked on, it would be sent away. We wouldn't receive that delivery, and that straight away drives that compliance piece because they know they can't get into our site until they're compliant.
That's great. I think that answers a question that Ron sent through as well. So a question here from Ron. Apart from driver declarations and required training licenses, etc., is there any other action taken to ensure compliance?
So with regards to drivers themselves, so obviously there's the Sydney Metro driver curriculum, which is that one-day TAFE course. So we request and ensure all our drivers do that. We also have a project-specific driver induction, which really sets our sort of our expectations when they're driving in and around the site of what we want from them. We typically, depending on what it is, so if it's a high-risk activity, such as some of the steel stuff for the roof or some of the truck and dogs, we'd ask to see that all their drivers are briefed on a risk assessment and swims of how they're going to carry out their particular duty from a legislation point of view for haulage. We would sometimes, depending on the nature of the subcontract and how it's been procured, actually look at their own change of responsibility management systems and how they manage it in their own organisation, to give us that sort of peace of mind that they're aware of the risks and they've got the right sort of controls in place to deal with them.
That's great, thanks. So another question from Klaus. How was the safety performance stats type of instances observed over the course of the project?
So we touch wood, haven't really had any vehicle incidents on this project. And as we're saying earlier, so there's 30,000 vehicle movements over a life of a project. We're talking 80 to 100 heavy vehicle movements per day on our site, with quite a congested site where there's only one entrance point and one exit point in and out. So I wouldn't say we've seen a reduction because we haven't had any, but I think that the way we set up the site and the things we put in place allows us to manage that risk to ensure that we're not exposed, or at least we're managing that exposure. I guess you can imagine without these sort of things in place, it would be complete carnage, a bit of a free-for-all, and that risk profile would go through the roof, and you'd likely see several incidents.
Great. I'll combine two questions here. So one from Ron asking, is there any automation to assist drivers to manage risk? And one from Michael around, was there any requirements on age, newer or older, like 5 years of age or anything like that?
So the age one's easy. In short, no. We don't put a restriction on people's ages or vehicle and things like that to operate certain vehicles. To help the drivers manage, I guess, their risk. So the Voyage Control app is a great one because it alerts them when they deviate from approved routes. There's other systems that I'm currently trialing that I haven't talked about today, but I will happily come back and do a presentation on. Telematic systems that really do give you that line of sight and will allow you to geofence alerts. So a driver could enter a particular area and it could be an alert that comes on at a certain time of day to say, you're now entering the school zone, or phone up on the radio to say your approach to the traffic control so they're ready to receive you to lower the boom gates. There's a whole range of different things like that. We'll prompt him to take a rest break. We'll make sure he's on the approved routes. We'll alert him when he's feeding. So some pretty interesting telematics sort of software out there that I'm currently looking at and doing various trials for at the moment that actually give you complete line of sight of what your fleet is doing. And when I say fleet, for me, I'm talking about my whole supply chain.
Yeah.
So, 50, 60 different contractors. I can see whenever they're doing a delivery to me, where they are and what they're doing.
That's great. I think we'll squeeze these last two questions in. So we'll just go a little bit over, so I do apologise. And Adam's done a bit of a clarification. So considering New South Wales isn't currently aligned to the Austroads Guide to Temporary Traffic Management, how did you prioritise compliance with which standards and why? Did you have any issues with communicating these differences at all?
So for us, we always look to go over and above the standard. So we would pick typically the most rigorous standard and adopt that on a basis for managing risks. I wouldn't say it's easy, but because we are the principal representative, we have a greater control over what we expect and what we want to happen. Having said that, obviously, we still fall under all the various jurisdictions from City of Sydney, RMS, and as part of my role on the project, I actually get doing how we're managing it as, from a chain of responsibility point of view and sort of legislation point of view to make sure that what we are putting in place is up to standard.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Daniel. And last question from Rod. Interested in what LR training you provide drivers?
What was it? Sorry, the LR training?
LR training you provide drivers. So you may want to give us a little more direction on that, Rod. Interested in what LR training you provide drivers? Load restraint. There you go.
Load restraint.
Thanks, Rod.
So,
like that.
So there's quite a few things out there. I know Synergy and Coat both themselves do their own sort of load restraint awareness training, which is effectively a 4-hour sort of workshop where somebody comes out and they sit with the drivers and do some theory, then they actually take them out for a practical and they tie down various bits of kit onto trucks. That is what we have done on our site. So not so much with the drivers, but with the traffic control that are ultimately reviewing these load restraint forms. They would go through and check the load and then countersign to say that load's signed off. Anybody that we deem high risk, so particularly the guys that were transporting the roof components, we made it mandatory that before that delivery left their yard, we were sent the load restraint forms that were signed by a number of approved people. So they didn't train every people that were trained and competent to do that, and of which some of them were drivers. I've had other companies that have 4 or 5 drivers that will train all 4 and 5 drivers on, but we typically look to go to an external provider for that, and really then use that sort of in-house tool that I showed you earlier, really just to help that consultation drive that standard out on site. Which I should say we do, so it will be, it's not yet, it will be uploaded to our health and safety management system, which anybody in the world can access. So, and that all our primary standards are fatal and severe risks, and this tool will be uploaded there that people can actually get access to and use, and we encourage our supply chain to do that.
Awesome, thank you very much for that, Daniel. Actually, just one last, trying to squeeze one in. I know we're a little bit over time. I apologise, everyone. As you are an international large company, you do projects around the world. Is there much learning that goes on between the different sort of projects and countries under the Laing O'Rourke banner?
Oh, definitely. I mean, so I've been fortunate enough to work for Laing O'Rourke in Hong Kong and sort of Australia. So I spent 6.5 years in Hong Kong on the West Kowloon Terminus project. And the risk profile there is significantly different. So you don't really have a lot of as such public on the road, but you do have, I guess, a lot of other vulnerable road users. And the risk profile there is probably slightly different in that everywhere is so busy, everywhere is so congested that you really have to have these risks managed. They're a lot more sort of relaxed around some of the approval processes, and the legislation I don't think is quite there yet or as robust as what it is in Australia in terms of how you get approvals to go about your work. But we were, I guess, fortunate on that project that we were able to offer a lot of smarts around sort of spoil removal by barge, concrete and precast and steel for the roof there came in by barges, to sort of minimise that impact because of the nature of the job and the sheer size of it. But I guess the risk still exists. You're operating in a different sort of legislative framework that you have to get familiar with, and you have to ensure you address them risks. But then it's also going above and beyond that to say, well, that's what the law is. However, our benchmark's significantly higher than that, which is what Laing O'Rourke does. So we have that standard that we drive across the whole of Australia and sort of the Asia hub where we operate. And a similar sort of standard in the UK that takes us way above sort of the legislative requirements.
Daniel, thank you so much, man. Absolutely, I know it's an incredible project to share, and I can imagine your pride, like 2 mega projects to have under your belt that you can talk to and said, I was part, I built that. I think that's an amazing achievement. Someone your age. So thank you so much for coming on board today. No
worries. Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much to our audience. Great questions. The webinar and PowerPoint will be uploaded to our website. There will be an automatic email coming out and a survey question as well to complete. So give us your feedback. And next month we actually have a webinar on medicinal marijuana and mobile workers, and what do you need to know about prescription drugs in the mobile workforce, or things sort of popping up, and how do you assess the risk in those sort of areas. So Daniel, thank you again, mate. I hope things are drying out. And
thank you very much. Cheers.
No worries, mate. Take care. Thank you.